Hello, you probably saw the trigger warning. Yes, we're going to be tackling some very serious topics in this video regarding things like suicide. So if those things make you uncomfortable in any way, or you have a history when it comes to those things, I do highly recommend that you don't watch this video. It's not going to be too deep in that fact, but I would like to bring it to light purely because it is a very serious topic, and we're going to be tackling a very serious subject. With that being said, I'm going to get right into the video, just right into the introduction off of that. Welcome back. This is my second video. That's why I say welcome back. This time I did narrow down the topic more. So instead of focusing on like 50 years of content in like a 50-minute span, we're just basically going to be focusing on the modern state of being LGBT in Korea. Why I think that I have validity when I'm going to be talking about this is because I do know Korean culture very well, so much so that I can actually speak the language. I've also spent time over there. I hadn't attended a LGBT parade because it's technically against the law for foreigners over there to protest, even though there were definitely foreigners there. But I did not want to risk it because our program had directly told us about it. And even though our program was actually very pro LGBT, they were like, hey, please don't do that. Also, with all of this being said, I do think it's important to mention that I'm not Korean, so I also won't understand the full feeling of being LGBT, of course, in Korean. And I'm not LGBT either. I am very pro LGBT, very pro equality with marriage, pretty much pro everything, truthfully. But I am not LGBT, so I do want that to be stated. Um, just keep that in mind when I say things. I'm not going to say anything controversial, but I think it is important to put my biases out there, or understandings rather, with this one. It is just, I'm not going to fully understand the experience of somebody who is LGBT, especially somebody who is LGBT in a very conservative country like Korea. Also, this is not going to be an in-depth video completely covering all of Korean history. This is going to be an in-depth video covering the modern state of being LGBT in Korea. So keep that in mind, because there is many times in Korean history where there is LGBT people, such as one time there was even a king who is recognized as, or I guess, queen. Yeah, one time there was even a queen in Korean history who was one of the first to be recognized as transgender female. Reason why I hadn't immediately defaulted to that is they hadn't fully been that way, because that wasn't a way that anybody had been before in Korean history. So, but they are recognized as transgender female now. Remember, trigger warning just before I get fully into this. And with that being said, which I've said a lot this video, um, this is still a very serious topic in Korea. It's very taboo to talk about. It's not even talked about, really. Conservatives in Korea act like it is not a problem at all, and the treatment of LGBT people is not a problem at all. And they also treat it as if LGBT people are the ones who are actually oppressing them. And so, because this is still a very serious topic in Korea, it is still actively affecting many people in Korea. And so I want to re-emphasize that this is going to be a very serious video. There's not going to be much jokes in this video. It's just going to be a very serious video, because this does lead to many committing suicide today. And I just wanted to emphasize that before going in.
군에서 동성애가 굉장히 심합니다. 군 동성애는 이 국방 전력을 약화시키는데 어떻습니까? 거기는?
예, 그렇게 생각합니다.
그래서 동성애 반대하십니까?
반대하지요.
분명히 동성애는 이제 반대하는 것이죠.
예, 저는 뭐 좋아하지 않습니다.
좋아하는 게 아니고 반대하냐 찬성하냐 물으면.
합법화 찬성하지 않습니다.
예.
The video that I just showed you was at the time between an interviewer and a current presidential candidate who went by the name Moon Jae-in, and he is now president, or he was and became president of South Korea. He is part of the Democratic Party of Korea, and yet holding a view like that is still seen as something that is somewhat acceptable in Korea. And the reason why I showed that video and the reason why I emphasize something like this is just to show you how conservative Korea does tend to be when it comes to things like this. The fact that it is even something that can be remotely said without being ostracized in a left-wing party is something that is absolutely crazy. When it does come to Korean culture, it is very heavily inspired by Confucianism and modern conservative Christianity. Reason being is Confucianism has been in Korea for hundreds of thousands of years, and just beliefs like that in general, even before conservatism. And what Confucianism revolves around is cultural conformity, respect people older than you. And when I say cultural conformity, I mean you be like the people around you, you copy them. If you are different, something is wrong. And that is important to emphasize because, as we know, LGBT people are different, and not in a bad way, different like in a good way. So I think that needs to be emphasized, and that's going to be something that's very important as we go on. And also, it was heavily influenced by American culture when in the 50s America had invaded. And when Christianity did come in, it wasn't in a typically forceful way like it has been. However, it still came in and definitely wasn't their religion. The main reason they adopted it purely was because it was the religion of the people who had taken their land virtually. And there was a lot of Korean people that ended up marrying with Americans. And just things such as that had influenced their view. And so typically the thing in modern day Korea that now affects views on LGBT is no longer Confucianism, because it used to be Confucianism. Now it is going to be modern conservative Christianity. So much so that at most LGBT parades, something big that you'll see is people having signs such as "Repent from your sins" in English. I even saw it myself. I saw a sign with something like that, and it's crazy, the religious disconnect. And when I say religious disconnect, I mean that religious people have from non-religious people, and the difference in focus and the difference in understanding. And the difference in understanding is not coming from the non-religious people to the religious people. It is something that the religious people don't understand about the non-religious people. It's that saying something like that is utterly crazy to justify such a homophobic position, and many transphobic signs too. And also, Korean government is structured nearly identically with the American government, other than their Senate and House being called the National Assembly. And because of that, Christian companies are known to completely just lobby in their Congress, which is going to be called the National Assembly. And they're known to completely lobby for politicians. And so what they'll end up doing is sending a lot of money to a right-wing candidate, funding causes that are LGBT, and so much so that a Christian company that was known for lobbying actually was sanctioned by the government of Korea, because on a podcast, they had stated that if the anti-discrimination law for LGBT people is gone through, it will bring pedophilia to the country, bestiality, things such as that, and Korea will be, quote, stricken with AIDS. Korea is actually at the bottom of OECD countries when it comes to LGBT rights, which is another big thing. It's also the fastest growing when it comes to acceptance for LGBT rights, but that growth isn't in older people. That growth is in younger people now who are now adjusting and are now learning what and how older generations have accepted. Well, they haven't accepted how they have dealt with LGBT people. Now the younger generations are learning that was wrong. 2016 survey actually said that 16.1% of LGBT people who came out were recommended conversion therapy by their family members, instead of being accepted immediately and saying like, hey, you like the same gender, that's cool, like that's okay, it's okay to like the same gender. It is normal, like that's an okay thing. Accepting family, they recommended therapy, or 16.1% got recommended therapy. And then 65.4% of those who were recommended therapy and went to it said that it was harmful to them, and actually 94% of that 65% experienced psychological trauma and walked away from it different, not in a way where they're now not LGBT, but in a way where they now have things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, which is absolutely even twisted that an institution like that can still exist. And I think that 90, hopefully 100, hopefully 100% of the people watching this video agree how twisted that is, that an institution like that can still exist, especially in even back to 2016. It is realistic because we all know, especially 2016 is going to be less accepting LGBT people than now, but it is just twisted that an institution like that could ever exist. And in 2014, 85% of Koreans were asked if they believed gay people should, be protected from discrimination. And that 85% said yeah. And then 90% actually support equal employment opportunities for LGBT people. However, with that being said, as of a 2017 Gallup poll, 58% of Koreans were against same-sex marriage, which is definitely not equality. So you have 85% who say, like, oh yeah, they should be protected from discrimination. But the issue is a lot of Koreans don't agree on what discrimination is against LGBT people too. And the reason why I'm emphasizing these things so strongly is it's going to be affecting the cases and stories that we look through and just situations that happen in Korean government and effectively situations that can happen. 34% of Koreans actually do support same-sex marriage. And so in between that 58 and 34%, there's a big percentage there that literally has no opinion, which is equally as sad. It's sad that a group of people can be asked that question, like, hey, do you think gay people should be able to equally marry and be their love be acknowledged for each other like straight people? And then nearly well over 10% say, I don't know. That is utterly ridiculous, and it's sad. It's truly sad. 41% think that same-sex marriage should be legal, and 54% think that it shouldn't be too. And so there's a difference with being against and supporting it and thinking that it should be legal. We all know the slight nuance of that, but 41% think that it should be legal, and 53% think that same-sex marriage in South Korea shouldn't be legal. And even keep in mind, just like America, there are a lot of people that think that it should be illegal that are still homophobic. And that's something also important to take into account. Along with that, there is no form of discrimination protection in most cities, and there's no equal marriage for LGBT people in South Korea. There is no form of any way to get a marriage through the South Korean government. The only way to get any marriage for somebody who's LGBT that's going to be acknowledged by the South Korean government is to do it in another country or to have had it in another country. And then when you come to Korea, they will recognize it. But the South Korean government themselves will not have a session and marry two people who are LGBT and who are gay or who are lesbian, and which is sad. And because of that, we saw cases such as in May 2019, somebody named Kim Yoo-jin married her wife, except when she had to marry her wife, or when she did marry her wife, she went all the way to Manhattan in the United States just to obtain a marriage registration. And when she was interviewed about her experiences and what she went through and having to go through the Korean government about that on a KBS, which is basically like CNN but in Korea, and when she was interviewed about that, there was 10,000 comments, 80% of which were negative. So there was 8,000 comments that were completely negative towards her, not positive at all, not supportive, not wanting her there, because then you ended up encountering some comments that said, such as, quote, get out of Korea, because people in Korea who believe that are worried that society would fall apart due to lesbian weddings. Luckily, South Korea does have protection when it comes to malicious comments online. That protection is not for LGBT people. That protection is for everybody, which is good too, that LGBT people can use it and are treated like normal human beings. But she did sue 100 of the commenters. I could not figure out for how much she did. Also, Korea has a very big pride parade culture, very much like San Francisco. It's probably that big of a pride parade culture. They've been having pride parades since 2000. with only 50 people at the first Pride Parade, which we all agree is not a lot. But literally only 6 years later, so 2016, it went from 50 to 50,000. And then in 2017, 85,000. And then ahead of the 2018 event, sadly, compared to the 85,000 people that went to the 2017 event, 220,000 people signed an online petition to block the festival. And these were people who obviously weren't going, who weren't supportive of LGBT matters. But it's crazy to think that 220,000 people will intentionally stand in the way, and not just stand in the way, but try and put bricks and walls in the place to prevent something as simple as people who are LGBT celebrating the fact that they can identify as the gender that makes them feel comfortable, to identify as the gender that they are, or celebrate the fact that they're allowed to love somebody of the same gender and love them as straight people can love each other. And it's crazy to think that people would intentionally put bricks and walls in place just to block something like that, even in a country like Korea, which is very conservative. Luckily, the officials were very positive when it came to the Pride Parade and said, no, it's still happening, we're not going to block it. And then 120,000 people actually did attend it, which is, it's over half of 220,000. It's over 110,000. But it's crazy that nearly double of the people who went didn't even want it to happen. It wasn't a riot, it wasn't a protest, it was simply a parade. Which is just crazy that people wouldn't want other people to be happy that they could love each other and that they could be comfortable in their own skin. And then in July 2019, a conservative Christian group and many conservative Christian groups actually tried to block the festival, saying that it would be harmful to children and it would infringe on their rights, which is sadly a common trope that we do see in many conservative beliefs. It is this belief that the people who are LGBT and people who are left-wing are attacking our children, they're indoctrinating our children, even though, let's be honest, I am in a conservative state and it's not the liberals who are indoctrinating children. It is the people who will grow up and tell a kid Biden is bad, he is racist, or he hates us is a big one. And it's crazy to think that those people who are telling their kids that will then say about LGBT people that they're the ones who are trying to infringe on your rights and indoctrinate you. It is something that is absolutely crazy, but that is universal. Through many countries, that's how the conservatives act. Also, in another city named Incheon, the authorities wouldn't allow a parade to take place because they're Seoul, where we've had parades take place. And then when it comes to Incheon, recently they started taking place, but the authorities actually didn't allow them from having a pride parade. They said there's not enough parking for it. That was their justification. There wasn't enough parking for it. Either way, the LGBT people in Incheon did still have a pride parade, and then sadly 1,000 violent Christian rioters really came and violently attacked the LGBT people. They attacked, and not even just LGBT people, but everybody who was protesting, which is, or not protesting, just having a parade, which is something that's absolutely crazy to think about, that people from a religion that says that it's supposed to be peaceful and it's supposed to respect people's rights did something like that. And then as of May 2018, this is a positive. The first drag parade did take place in Korea. There was dozens of attendees, not quite hundreds, but there was dozens. So they're also making speed and making progress when it comes to being able to dress and drag. And then throughout 2020, well, the COVID-19 outbreak was happening all over the world, and especially so in Korea when it came to lockdowns. There was an online hashtag that went around because they couldn't have a physical pride parade. They didn't want to kill people over a pride parade. And there was an online hashtag that went around that translates to "we make the roads where there are none." And because the idea is they're paving a whole new way for the generation, which is so positive when you think about it. And I think that something that's important to take into account when you look at this dynamic is the enemy of the LGBT people are sadly Christians in Korea. And then the enemy of the Christians in Korea are not LGBT people. The enemy of Christians in Korea are truthfully no one. They're just attacking everybody. And it's sad to see with me being Christian. It's sad to look at people who have my own religion and then have such a hateful ideology, because that's what it is. It's hateful. Everybody would agree, no matter what religion you are, that doing something like that is naturally hateful. South Korea's discrimination law also does not protect on the grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity. That's something that's going to be also important to take into account. Young people who are LGBT in South Korea face much bullying and harassment, and students were actually interviewed by the Human Rights Watch when it came to this, and they described their experiences of being excluded, ostracized, targeted online, or beaten up. And what's sad is, even if there is a teacher who supports being LGBT and recognizes that being harassed is wrong, they can't do anything because there's not any laws set in place. So if they do something, they could get in trouble. They could get fired if they say, hey, something as simple as, hey, don't do that. They can be fired for that because of how conservative South Korea is, and because of how much times conservative, Christian, evangelical groups have lobbied in their government to prevent bills like that just being passed. A 22-year-old lesbian woman described that once she came out, her classmates had accused her of being dirty because they just called her homosexual. They said, you are homosexual, you are dirty. A 22-year-old gay man described that he was targeted by his classmates in a way where they used gay as a slur, which there is a slur for it when it comes to Korean too. And then a 17-year-old girl who was lesbian actually reported her classmates saying to her, homosexuals should just die, which is very sad that something like that can even be, it's not even encouraged, but okay is a better word to describe it, because it's not really heavily encouraged when it comes to cities like Seoul that I've been in. But people saying that is just normal. It's just like, oh, well, you know, that's their belief. And most people don't go after it. Most people don't confront it, which is something that's very sad to see in Korea. Seoul province then finally did end up banning bullying students on the basis of their sexual orientation in 2012. This doesn't mean the problem was fixed at all, because we still do have situations when it comes to LGBT people, really serious topic coming up, committing suicide. We've seen this with people such as Byung Hye-soo, Kim Ji-hoon, and even more. And Kim Ji-hoon was an openly gay singer who died by hanging on October 8th, 2008, which the police, who are conservative in Korea, actually did attribute to public prejudice against homosexuality. And as we know, most of that public prejudice comes from Christian Korean evangelicals, specifically nationalist Christian nationalists. There also is, you're not allowed to be gay in the military up until this year. That was a thing. Up until 2022, the Military Criminal Act made being homosexual an explicit crime with up to 2 years in prison. And how that worked was, it was homosexual, so engaging in any sort of activity with people in the military, out of the military, off duty, on duty. Big one is off duty. If you have somebody who you love and you care about and you decide that you want to express that in any way, then the military will and can put you in prison for up to 2 years, even though you were off duty and it was with somebody who wasn't even in the military. And they do a psychological test at the beginning of everyone's service there, where if you are homosexual, you're qualified as having a behavioral disability. Like, you can't control yourself, or you can be institutionalized because of that, and you can even be discharged dishonorably. Even if you've done the act or not, as long as you're homosexual, they can immediately do that to you. There was a famous story that happened in January 2020 where a staff sergeant, Byung Hye-soo, had a sex transition. And so she went from being male to female. But because of that, they actually qualified her as having a mental or physical handicap because of the loss of that area. And she was dishonorably discharged and dismissed simply for wanting to fight for her country, but oh well, she's transgender. Just because she did not feel completely comfortable in the skin of being a man because she wasn't a man, and then they outcasted her from protecting her own country. And so, because of the military doing that, on March 3rd, 2021, they found her dead in her apartment, which police had ended up attributing to the military doing that. When it comes to action that the Korean government does take against this, 15 local governments in South Korea have enacted anti-discrimination policies such as Seoul, Jeju, and Gyeonggi-do, and there's many more. Gyeonggi-do is right by Seoul. I've been there. And then in 2007 and 2013, the Ministry of Justice actually submitted a new bill, or tried to. In both cases, they tried to, making it so that you could not discriminate people based on their religion, sexual orientation, or political ideology, which is obviously a positive. Everybody watching this video, I hope, agrees that that's a positive. However, both were struck down. In 2007, it was struck down immediately, and then in 2013, it was given a chance, but it was never brought to the debate stage, so it was never voted on in the National Assembly. And it was conservative groups that had actually contested the bill. And then in 2018, this is a positive. The first openly non-binary candidate ran for Senate, or in this case, a seat in the National Assembly. Their name was Kim Gi-hong, and they did end up losing in 2018, but then ran again in 2020. Sadly, they lost again, and due to all the pain that they did end up enduring, it led to them taking their own life after their 2020 running for a seat. When it comes to LGBTQ rights in South Korea, they are very, very discriminated. LGBT people are not protected in the majority of Korea. LGBT people are ostracized by their parents, they're ostracized by their family, they're ostracized by their community. And LGBT people do not have proper representation when it comes to anybody being LGBT in their National Assembly. The majority of South Koreans do not want equal rights for LGBT people. Overall, being LGBT in South Korea is one of the worst places to be LGBT when it comes to the first world, because, and that's me being realistic, purely because in the ranking of OECD countries, it is rated as the worst for LGBT rights. And this was a fairly serious video. I am being serious when I say all this. But I think that we should take this information that we hear here and respect it, because it is serious. It's not something to crack jokes about and to go and make it not serious anymore. However, I think that we can take this information and use it as fuel to push on. So when people say things that are utterly psychotic, like we hear many conservatives in America use today and say today, we can then combat with stories such as this. When you hear conservatives talk about how they think gay people should not be in the military, bring up the story of Byung-hae-soo. It's okay if you don't remember the name Byung-hae-soo, just say in Korea or in situations like this, because there is a country 2.2 when it comes to gay rights like that being oppressed and where it's not working out. Stories of conversion therapy, how conversion therapy, 65% of the people who went through it here, then, 65% of the people reported being hurt by it and it actively affecting them in that way. And then 95% of those 65% walking away with trauma. So it is something that's serious, because this is people's real lives and people ending their lives. But we don't want them to die in vain either. We don't want to just sit down and say, well, this is terrible, I can't do anything. Because we can. With this information, which is the only way how I know how to describe it is terrible, I think that we can grow from this as a society if we walk away reading stories like this, and even stories in America, learning something. And that's ultimately what I want people to walk away from this video doing. It's learning something. It's being able to stand for your own beliefs, know what's homophobic, what's transphobic, what's anything when it comes to orientation at all. Phobic, and understanding how to combat that, understanding what evidence we have, understanding what happens to countries when laws that are like that get passed. People die. When anti-discrimination bills aren't passed, people die.